Like you mentioned, I was kind of active. It was active, like I said, I wanted, because these are the same streets that my parents, my uncles, my aunts, they would walk on. So if I could take one criminal off the street, that was one less guy that could have robbed them, extort from them, criminal acts. And back then in the 80s and 90s, it was very busy. I mean, when I first came into 5th Precinct, they used to fly in cops for gang posts. So they would fly in cops from different commands, and they just stood there, and it was considered a gang post 1, gang post 2. So one cop, but then they wouldn't really help because they flew in these cops from different precincts. They didn't know the area. They were more like deterrents, whereas I felt that it was my job to actually get these guys. Yeah, I took pictures. I took a lot of pictures. You mentioned you didn't go to the funeral.
Yeah, a lot of my gangmates didn't go to the funeral because they knew that you were going to be there taking pictures.
I take pictures of everybody because I could see the hierarchy, who comes out first, who's actually closest, the respecting. I can tell who's the boss, who's rising up in the ranks. So from a few pictures, we get a lot of intel.
Yeah.
And my thing is, so for the gang members, for the guys that were in the gang, they were committing a crime every single day. Like there wasn't a day that you're a gangman, you're not doing out there, whether you're extorting a restaurant. Back then, video rentals were big.
So making a lot of money with those video rentals.
Right, counterfeiting and all that fireworks. So every day, like some crimes are not as violent or harmful as others.
Yeah, those are non-violent
crimes.
Right,
but I look at this way.
You guys didn't really enforce those type of crimes, like the video VCR tapes, bootleg tapes from the Hong Kong TVB movies.
My thing was more like extortions, where, so like I mentioned, I had a family member that opened a barbershop. He was charging $3 a cut, and the gang wanted something like, I forgot the exact amount. It was like hundreds of dollars per month for protection money. And in his mind, in my uncle's mind, it was my uncle, he had to do like 100 haircuts before he could even break even to pay protection from some kids. You're like paying protection from themselves, it wasn't outsiders coming to extort from him. It was so that your locks weren't glued, they wouldn't put toothpicks in them. So,
and my uncle, he lived in 26 East Broadway on the 6th floor, right? And he's a taxi driver, yellow cab. Whenever he comes home from work, the dong on would just wait for him, collect their $10 a night. It's so sad.
Yeah, I felt that was the harmful. Like, these people are not rich; they're struggling to make that living, and meanwhile, they're getting picked on by their own, and it's hard enough already, So that was my thing. And then later on, when it got more violent with the kidnappings, the homicides, there was a period in the 80s and 90s where a lot of people were being smuggled in, Golden Venture. Mm-hmm. But when these people came, some of them, not full payment was made, or maybe full payment was made, but then when these gang members saw that you were on the street, they would just kidnap you because they figured if you had your family had $30,000 to smuggle you over, they could come out with another $10,000 to keep you alive. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of that going on. I mean, we had one particular case where we just started our shift, and a guy comes running into the station house, 5th Precinct, in his underwear. Mm-hmm. And apparently he was on a payphone the night before on Eldridge Street, which back then was controlled by the Fuk Ching. And he was just on the phone. And back then, you could buy like a card where you can call China.
Mm-hmm, the phone cards.
Right, and then you'll be on the phone for like hours. Yeah. So the gang members figured out, hey, this guy, he's on the phone a long time. He's probably calling China. So he's calling China, we can get some money. So they didn't know this guy. They just kidnapped this guy right off the street. They brought him to an apartment on Delancey Street. And how we found out that later was that this guy, what happened was they handcuffed him to a bed, and the bad guys, the gang members, they started drinking and gambling. They got drunk. So sometime during the middle of the night, he tells the guy, hey, I have to go to the bathroom. And the guy uncuffs him and lets him go. They're close to each other, so...
The tenements in Chinatown.
Yeah, a lot of them close. So he was able to climb out the window, and the next tenement was like just a couple, and he shimmied himself down in his underwear all the way to the ground floor, and he knew where the 5th Precinct station house was, and he ran to the 5th Precinct. So now we're trying to ask him, hey, where did they take you? These guys, hopefully they're still drunk. They don't know that he escaped. He goes, I don't know, but there's a pet shop on the ground floor. So we threw him in the back of our taxi cab that you guys mentioned. We had undercover taxi cab. Yeah. And we went to all the pet shops. And then finally, the one on Delancey, he goes, that's the building. And he goes, what else? What apartment? He goes, you know what's messed up? The apartment, there's like a hole where the lock is supposed to be. He didn't know, he knew it was on the ground floor, it was upstairs. So he said there's a hole in there where the lock was, I guess, punched out. Uh-huh. So then we left him in the car and we went upstairs. We had another team go to the roof and come down and then we found the apartment. There was one apartment where there was a hole punched out. So we made sure we covered the fire escape and stuff like that. And I knocked on the door. I said, delivery. And then a guy opens the door, seizes me, and tries to force it back. So my sergeant, who's like 6'2", 6'3", and we're all shoving in, and finally we push our way in. They try to go through a fire escape, but we had other cops there. But before we got in, they opened the window and they tossed the guns out the window. Mm-hmm. But in the end, we ended up, I think, making 4 or 5 arrests out of that. But here's a guy just on the street. They kidnapped him because they know he most likely he came from China, mm-hmm. and they were trying to get ransom money to keep him alive. Mm-hmm. And there's been other cases where it's unsolved homicides where the people just couldn't afford to pay up, and they end up killing these people.
And those are the Fukinese.
Mostly Fukinese. So
mostly.
Yeah, when these people get smuggled over, a lot of times the contracts go out, mm-hmm. and these crews would be assigned to watch a certain number of people until the full payment was made.
Sometimes when they do the kidnapping, the payments are made in China.
Yes, that's why it's very hard to prosecute, because it's very hard if the money drop is made here. Yeah. But if the money drop's made in China, it's very hard to do the other end. So I love I really felt that we were making a difference, mm-hmm. because in a span of a couple of years, a lot of people started, there was a period where not many people would call the police. Mm-hmm. They figured, let's just make the payment. But what we found out was that the more people that came forward, other people were more willing to.
Exactly. I mean, with the Fukinese, they were like new immigrants. First, it was the Cantonese and the Taiwanese, right? Originally, they didn't want to deal with the police.
Yes.
But after a certain amount of years, and they see that the police are actually, solving some cases for them.
And it's easier when, like you guys mentioned, there were few police officers. But when you have people that also speak your language, mm-hmm. and again, I came when I was 5, so my Chinese is bad. I speak Chinese with a American accent and English with a Chinese accent. That's me. And there's so many dialects. Even like sometimes you have to get other people involved to get the full story across.
You think there's a lot of unsolved homicides out there in Chinatown?
There's many. Actually, later on through the ranks, I made a list of all the ones I knew. I think I was up to like 30 something. I mentioned to one you off record. That's still a lot of unsolved. And you guys mentioned too, I think there's a lot more emphasis on a case where it's not Asian on Asian, mm-hmm. where I think a lot of communities feel that way, whether it's black on black or, when it comes to minorities, mm-hmm. which isn't always the case, but sometimes that's the perception. Mm-hmm.